Welcome to this Euractiv virtual conference on illicit trade in Europe, scale, impact and solution. This event is supported by JTI. You can follow this discussion, hashtag EA debates, and please tweet your comments using that hashtag. Our social media team will respond to you there and amplify your comments and your messages there too. Also, to send questions to our panel during the discussion, put them on the chat section. You can see there the Q&A, and we'll bring those to the panel during the course of the discussion. We're not going to wait till the very end to do that, so please send your questions as quickly as possible, and we'll bring those to the panel very soon. So please engage with that. Now, illicit trade is a growing threat in an increasingly digital and globalized economy. The World Economic Forum estimates that over 2.2 trillion US dollars, that's 3% of global GDP, has been lost due to illicit trade leakages in 2020 alone. Additionally, according to the Transnational Alliance to Combat Illicit Trade, imports of counterfeit and pirated goods are worth nearly $500 billion a year. Now, during the COVID-19 pandemic, illicit activities have increased across different sectors such as pharmaceuticals, tobacco, alcohol, PPE, home personal sanitation products, luxury goods, and beauty products as well. And supply and demand disruptions, including restricted travel and international border closures, have compelled criminals to change their tactics and adapt their networks. And one of the most noticeable changes has been the shift to the online environment. Many stakeholders believe there's no simple solution and that illicit trade must be targeted from multiple policy angles. To discuss this and the impact of illicit trade in society and the European economy, our panel today includes Javier Dot. He's a member of the European Economic and Social Committee. Great to have you with us. Morgan Godiot, an economist on illicit trade at the OECD. Cindy Braddon, head of communications and public policy at Traceit. And Lucina Ovinyam, and she's the Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Communications at JTI. Great to have all of you with us today. Thanks for taking the time to be with us. Now, I'm going to ask each of you for approximately 60 seconds of an elevator pitch, your key message to kick off today. Javier, can we start with you?
Hello, how are you? Good afternoon. Very preoccupied today by other things that illicit trades.
Do you have any a quick comment to make in terms of how you see the illicit trade in the European economy?
Yes. I like to begin saying that in one day like today, when last night saw Russia's military aggression against Ukraine, an injustifiable attack that destroys the main basis of international law and peaceful coexistence between nations, all my concerns are focused on what is happening in Eastern Europe, first and foremost to the Ukrainian population, but I am also thinking of the consequence for the rest of Europe, the European Union, and the whole of humanity. In relation with that, we need to be much more serious, much more effective in the persecution of economic crimes. The illicit trade, but the other economic crimes, sometimes economic and political crimes, in its various manifestations, which are grouped and linked with the money laundering. Because this illicit trade and economic crimes are politically, intellectually, and morally unacceptable under any circumstances, even more so now when first the pandemic and now the consequence of the war in Ukraine will require additional public resources to deal with the consequence. And it's clear that it's not only to speak about refugees, we need the consequence of speak about the increase enormous of the price of energy, the inflation, perhaps the paralysis of economic recovery, many consequences. And by that, the criminals that practice this kind of criminal should be absolutely condemned, but persecuted in Europe. And this is not the reality in all the countries, in all the circumstances. There are many people that help this kind of illicit traffics.
Okay, thank you. We'll get into some of the detail of those different networks a little later on in the discussion. Thank you, Javier. Morgan Gaudio, over to you, 60 seconds.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. So I just want to begin by recalling that the OECD is here to provide policymakers with evidence on illicit trade. So we have many years of experience in providing analysis and in identifying the main trends that characterize illicit trade. So we provide facts. We provide overview as well as specific picture on particular trends, such as the misuse of small parcels or the misuse of container ships in international trade in counterfeits. And one of the most important facts I'd like to highlight here in introduction is that the trade in counterfeit goods is massive. It's a huge phenomenon, as you already mentioned it in your introduction. But here at the OECD, we have estimated the value of this trade. We have estimated that this value amounted to $464 billion in 2019. So this is huge. And as a comparison, it's close to the Belgian GDP.
Okay, thank you. And Cindy Braden, sorry.
Hi, thank you, Brian. I wanted to provide some context for my remarks by introducing TRACEIT, which is the Transnational Alliance to Combat Illicit Trade. And we are a 4-year-old non-profit business association that's solely focused on curbing illicit trade across the globe with all of its negative impacts. We do that through reports where we do research and develop evidence in order to underpin our advocacy. And we work closely with organizations like the OECD and other governments, NGOs, and other business associations. It's a huge issue, and I look forward to the discussion today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Cindy. Lucine, over to you.
Thank you, Brian. Many people see illicit trade as an abstract and distant issue, something that is happening elsewhere. Majority of people are unaware of the scale of this problem. And the reality is that these criminal gangs are on our doorsteps, deeply embedded in the fabric of our society. And they're making huge profits. It was already mentioned by previous speaker, huge profits at the expense of society, at our expense. And too often, unfortunately, governments do not give the illicit trade the attention it deserves because the true scale and cause, very often, it's hidden. But the fiscal shock from the COVID-19 pandemic leaves them no choice. They and we all, too, can no longer afford to ignore illicit trade. Otherwise, criminals will continue to line their pockets while the many honest and hardworking people struggling to make ends meet. And these people will pay the price. In essence, until governments act to capture these illicit gains, honesty is being taxed. And we believe this is unacceptable. Governments must redouble their efforts to stop the illicit trade, including addressing affordability, which is a key driver, as costs of living, as we all know, outpace very often wage growth. Evidence shows that excessive fiscal measures are ineffective and counterproductive. And a good example is France. Good or bad, better to say bad example. It has seen a huge growth in illicit tobacco in the last 3 years because of significant increases in excise tax. In 2021, an estimated 36% of all cigarettes in the country were illegal, while in just a couple of years ago, in 2017, it was around 13%. So it's very clear evidence.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Cindy, I want to come back to you just in terms of, let's just set some of the discussion in terms of the evidence that your organization has gathered and to help us understand the impact of illicit trade on the economy and on society. And what stands out for you? What's the biggest damage that's been done?
Well, we have seen when governments don't have the proper regulatory structures in place that can curb criminals who are using forced labor and other illicit modes of manufacturing goods that can harm consumers in our homes. We have seen it grow significantly, as our colleagues from the OECD has just noted, particularly because of the growth in electronic commerce and shopping online. And we have seen evidence from in 3 reports that we've recently published. We recently did a report called The Human Cost of Illicit Trade, Exposing Demand for Forced Labor in Dark Corners of the Economy. And in this report, we found that counterfeit manufacturing often occurs in the clandestine workplaces outside of the labor market oversight and standards, and workers are harmed. In another report, we found a linkage between sovereign credit ratings and the ability to curb illicit trade. So nations are vulnerable to illicit trade, also have increased cost to access dollars in the capital markets. And then finally, we mapped the illicit trade impacts on achieving the 17 strategic development goals of the UN, and we found significant harm caused in just a few examples. In agri-foods, for example, fake, substandard, smuggled, and illegal agri-foods cost the global food industry an estimated $330 billion each year. In 1 to 4 alcohol bottles are illicit, representing 25.8% of all global consumption. And I could go on chapter by chapter. It affects every industry sector, and it affects every business, and affects consumers.
Okay, let's hear some of those statistics again later on as well. Listen, the phrase you used was this is a tax on honesty, and in the context of the global pandemic as well. In my own country, Ireland, the borrowing required during the pandemic, I think it's 33 billion, has now pushed the national debt above 100% in terms of debt to GDP ratio, which in previous economic times would have crashed the sovereign borrowing capacity as well. Now we're in this frame of possible austerity because governments will have to readjust their budgets. We have this potential resource for tax revenue if illicit trade is clamped down. Why do governments not act more quickly, more firmly to address this issue, Lucinda?
It's a very good question, why they do not act. It's very clear that loss of tax revenue to law-abiding citizens is very significant, and is the effect on consumers lured into buying substandard illegal products. I wouldn't say that governments do not pay at all attention to this problem. Definitely, there is a lot happening, and we as an industry player, my company, JTI, we also work very closely with governments and with law enforcement agencies to curb the illicit trade. And we provide the information, we arrange even training courses, and we do a lot. But what is clear that it's not enough what is happening. And we need greater cooperation between government agencies and law enforcement at both an international and national levels, and along with very concrete efforts to increase the fines, increase the punishments for those producing, distributing, selling illegal tobacco. And in my view, it's very important not just to make the liability more severe, but very important to make it inevitable. So enforcement is playing a critical role there. Otherwise, yes, it will continue to be a high profit and low risk. It's low risk source of revenue for criminals. So in my view, that's more to do from the government side together with the industry players.
Okay, I think Cindy, you mentioned about France, was it in terms of, I know Morgan, you mentioned about France earlier in the increase as well in illicit trade during the last few years. Now, if excise prices are likely to tip an increase in illicit trade, for example, increase in tax on cigarettes, for example, and so the risk to reward balance changes, Morgan, how do you think that can be addressed? Is this, do we have the public policy tools to do this, or as Lucine says, this is an enforcement issue because it's low risk? People are prepared to take that chance. They're not likely to get punished. Where do you see the policy levers that are necessary to calibrate this? Lucine, sorry, Morgan.
Yeah, of course, as mentioned by Cindy and Lucine as well, this is an activity, this is a criminal activity which is associated with very high profits and very low risk of detection. So I think that first of all, of course, law enforcement authorities has to play a very important role in this detection, and then for the prosecutions, of course, as well. But for example, it's very, very simple to say, but what we see from our data or from interviews with law enforcement officials is that there are many trends. For example, the misuse of small parcels is a very good example, because this is a very great. This is a great opportunity for criminals, because the detection risks when it comes to small parcels is very low. At the quantities are very big, and there are all these counterfeit goods are intermingled with legitimate ones. So
okay, thank you. Let me ask Javier, just in terms of enforcement, Javier, how do you see? You spoke about prosecution as well, the need for that to be stepped up. But how do you see this risk-reward ratio changing? How do you persuade criminal networks that it's not worth their while in practical terms? Javier?
Well, first of all, I like to tell you that in the European Economic and Social Committee, I have worked mainly in one kind of illicit trade of money, financial active, and the money laundering, that it's the core of this kind of crimes, also corruption, economic and political corruption, because after one illicit trade, after tax evasion, after tax avoidance, the money need to be laundered, and by that, this aspect and the place to the end, to finalize the processes, the tax havens, is the core of this kind of delict and all systematic corruption in the world. Why? How we can combat more efficiently this very difficult situation? Because after you ask about how it's so difficult, well, when we read the list of the names of the list of Pandora Papers, Paradise Papers, or Panama Papers, it is easy to think how it's so difficult. There is political president, the entourage of Putin, the king, Spanish king Juan Carlos I, the president of Chile. This is and more of the elite, cultural, sportive, and political. Well, this by that is so difficult, because there are a kind of crimes.
The former king of Spain, I doubt he was smuggling cigarettes in and out of Spain, despite his many adventures across the globe. So the level of, are we talking petty criminals here? Is it large organized networks? Is it both? And is this why it's so difficult? And if we're going to go for big wins, should we focus? Let me finish. Should we focus on the big players to achieve this, or should we focus on the many small players? How do you scheme this, Javier?
No, the problem is the network to money laundering, the cell companies and the industry that manage this cell company, law companies consulting is for the worst criminal activities and this other activity that it's different, the opinion, the public opinion. This is about tax evasion and tax avoidance. This is the white part, but the network is the same. And by that, what can we do? Finally, common laws. I think the package of the last package, July 2021 for the European Commission, this is a good initiative. If finally the guideline of OECD could be implemented in the countries, and finally, if there was one social unity about to fight this crime, all this crime. Also, there are another problem. Yeah,
let me come back. Let me come back to this moment. Let me ask Morgan about what are the OECD guidelines that should be implemented, which you see not implemented when it comes to illicit trade?
I mean, as I said in introduction, we are here at the OECD to provide facts. Ideally, this evidence is used afterwards to put to build, of course, policies to tackle this illicit trade. But this is very complicated. But here at the OECD, for example, we are building policies for illicit trade in free trade zone. This is one of our big achievements. But we are still working on it. But it's very complicated because many stakeholders have to be with us, and we are achieving it because we are building like a certification of free trade zone to make them more transparent. For example, in terms of illicit trade. But yeah, we are here for we provide. And then, establishing policies is complicated, but we are doing so in terms of.
Let me bring some of this to Cindy. Cindy, you mentioned in terms of labor exploitation, for example, is just one element. Now, if we look across other policy areas like the environment and how we're trying to get certification, just like Morgan said, in terms of energy and other pharmaceutical products. We have a very strong traceability for supply chains there. Now, while we see an increase in fraud and illicit trade when it comes to e-commerce now, perhaps now we also have the tools to be able to certify, regulate, and increase transparency when it comes to illicit trade as well. Do you see that as a possibility? Cindy?
So, technology certainly can be helpful, and AI, there are a lot of tools, but the key is for private sector governments to work together, and anybody across the supply chain needs to be speaking with each other in order to make sure we're monitoring, reporting when we see that there are bad actors before products get delivered. I mean, the OECD has done some great work in the research and identifying problems. They have an anti-illicit trade task force that is working to spotlight areas that have been mentioned, like small parcels, and then developing the policy recommendations that get deployed into governments around the world. But it's, particularly in the e-commerce arena, you're able to, if we were able to get the private sector, the distributors, the payment processors, the platforms, all sharing information with each other, with law enforcement, with border patrols, then we can curb a lot of what's going into American homes.
Okay, and so it seems like we have capacity which isn't being exploited at the moment. Listen, just to ask you about, from the industrial side as well, what can producers do? What can the industry side bring to the table when it comes to combating illicit trade? What can you go to government and say, listen, we can do this, but we need your help on this element? What does that look like?
We can bring a lot, and we're bringing already a lot. As I mentioned, we're working really in close cooperation with law enforcement agencies. But what is very important, that enforcement is one part of the problem. We need to look into the cause of the problem. And talking about tobacco, illegal tobacco trade, what is the cause? As soon as cigarettes become less affordable, or any tobacco product, immediately there is a rise in illicit trade. So just to give you the perspective, if cigarettes become 10% more expensive for consumers relative to their income, the share of illegal tobacco will rise by an average of almost 7%, which means that it's very important that there should be reasonable and moderate taxation. It's an essential ingredient to prevent and combat the illicit trade. So, and what evidence also shows that excessive fiscal measures, they are very often counterproductive, and they really are not as effective as some governments want them or think they should be. And very often they fuel demand for cheaper products and drive law-abiding consumers to become complicit with criminality. So my message here, government should be very careful when taking any excise, sharp, especially excise hikes. There should be predictability in this, and there shouldn't be excessive measures, because otherwise the outcome is opposite to what it should be. So that's important, and we have a lot of actual statistics on this, which shows that, excessive taxation is not helping.
Yeah, I remember in Ireland some time ago, because there's the border between north and south, you could drive across the border to get illicit fuel if you so wanted to take that risk, because it was substantially cheaper, and then drive back and pay no excess in either country. And yet the quality of that fuel was well known to be subpar, and you wouldn't want to take that risk unless you thought your car could actually withstand it. And it seems to me that we focus on particular areas, but the degree to which illicit trade and smuggling is embedded in our everyday life. Is there a consumer element to this as well? For example, this illicit trade in fuel was largely stamped out through public awareness and an awareness that the police were watching as well. You could get caught, you could get fined. Do we need to do more from the consumer side, Cindy, to educate and to persuade people not to get involved in this kind of market, and also to make people aware of the consequences for their economy? Like, this is money that could be invested in healthcare. This is money which has effectively been stolen from your quality of life. Cindy?
Absolutely. Consumer awareness is critical. Too often people want to get the cheapest deal, particularly in an environment where inflation is, off the charts. And it's really important for them to understand that the dollars they are spending on cheap and fake products are going to fund criminals and are potentially funding the employment of forced labor in an unfair and unsafe manner. So it is very important that governments and private sector work together to get the communication out that just because a deal is cheaper doesn't mean it's going to be safe to you and can hurt your local economy. It can rob governments from having the tax revenues to spend into the community services that they require, and the list goes on.
Okay, Javier, from your perspective, how do we communicate to the citizens that illicit trade is a bad deal for everyone?
Well, I think we have the problem of the loss of public or fiscal conscience, public conscience. There is a phenomenon from 80s, from the right rebellion of Reagan and Thatcher against the tax, from our days. I think it's very, very important to have a education in the public values, in the necessity to pay tax and to be honorable in this camp. Is for me, before I heard that there is a problem with the illicit trade of tobacco, about the price of the tax. I have read in the last week one very important book of Emmanuel Saez and Gabriel Sugman, two professors of Berkeley University, about the fiscal history of United States, and from 1944 to 1986, the maximum marginal type of the revenue tax was 72%. But the tax level of tax evasion and tax avoidance are only 5. The concept of tax avoidance, there is no in these years. Is a concept of our days. It was only 5% of tax evasion. After the level of the tax go down, no, in the United States and other things of the world, same time increase the level of tax evasion and tax avoidance. Why that? Because there is a good work of ideological of the right parties of against the state, against the public values. That is one of the main consequence is the to broke to the public conscience about the necessity to pay tax, to have a public revenue. I think this is this problem of this ideology is now in crisis, fortunately. But the question is not clear because there are very strong powers against that conscience.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to some comments and questions. I want to pick up a bit more on the e-commerce element. Ivona Merton and from the Eurogroup for Animals says, with regards to Cindy's point on cooperation of all actors throughout e-commerce to make a real impact on illicit trade, do you think that the Digital Services Act is a missed opportunity to regulate such cooperation at the EU level? Cindy.
So we have been advocating for increased accountability for the e-commerce platforms in Europe and in the United States. We've had a number of bills that we've been working to get passed. And the key is having our e-commerce platforms vet the third-party sellers from the beginning to prevent the bad actors from going online and selling to unsuspecting customers. Yes, we think that more could be done in the various legislative vehicles that are moving in Europe.
Again, just to stay on this point for a moment, I can't imagine that a company like Coca-Cola will permit its supply chain to contain bad actors which haven't been audited, haven't been vetted, and which would be a risk to their brand reputation as well. And given the scope of capacity for the likes of Amazon and Google in terms of the global marketplace and e-commerce, should they have a greater responsibility in law to vet the supply chain, or is this should be a recommendation traded upon their brand responsibility? Cindy.
Yeah, so a lot of the Amazons of the world have voluntary programs that they're implementing, but unfortunately they're just not effective enough, and they're not standardized. So yes, we think that the e-commerce platforms need to have more a stake, more accountability. You're correct. If you have a Coca-Cola company and they're only offering their own products, then they don't have an issue. But when you have an e-mall that allows third parties to access your customers, we think they should better know who their sellers are, and have a role in vetting them from the beginning, and to disclose more information to consumers. So when you click on a listing, that you know who is selling it, so you can make your own choice, that there's an opportunity for you to identify if there's a counterfeit product or a bad product that you purchased, that recalls are followed up on by the e-commerce platforms. So when you have a situation, for example, the U.S. Trade Representative just came out last week with a report, their Notorious Markets report, which identified 42 online marketplaces around the world that are involved in engaged in or facilitating counterfeit goods.
I wonder which countries would top that list. Morgan, in terms of COVID and how this related to an increase in online fraudulence and illicit trade, what do you see in terms of the research that the OECD has done?
So yes, of course, COVID-19 has reshaped the illicit trade as criminals have adapted their strategy very quickly. And there was a real shift towards e-commerce. So we don't have data yet for the pandemic period, but interviews with law enforcement officials indicate this huge shift to cybercrimes. So yeah, criminals clearly took advantage of lockdowns and people working at home with less secure infrastructure. So they have the law enforcement authorities have also reported many seizures of COVID-19 related products, such as PPE or even COVID-19 vaccines. Another illustration is that of e-commerce being prominent, the fact that from March 2020, around 100,000 new domain names containing COVID-19 related words. So yeah, and COVID-19 being one of the keywords of the darknet. And as e-commerce, it's very difficult to regulate. Yeah, it's a big issue for illicit trade.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to some questions online. Vasilis Dalianis, he said, you've mentioned France, but only yesterday the EU Anti-Fraud Office, OLAF, announced that it took part in a number of operations to stop over 430 million illicit cigarettes from flooding the EU market. Do you have any information on illicit tobacco products in the EU per year, cost and numbers, for example? Listening, do you have any data on that? What does that look like in terms of illicit cigarettes in Europe?
For example, there is a report of KPMG that estimates that in 2020 smokers in Europe purchased 34.2 billion illegal cigarettes, which is, if we speak about tax loss for the governments, it's 8.5 billion tax losses in euros. Huge. Globally, the World Bank estimates lost revenue from illicit tobacco at almost 50 billion per year. Our estimation is even higher. It's clearly numbers are really very worrying, definitely. And just Brian, if I may add on educating consumers, I think it's really very important to educate consumers, because people, again, as I said in the beginning, they do not associate these criminals with themselves, even if they purchase illegal product. So education, it's essential. It's very important. And again, talking about online sales, we see the same trend in tobacco. There is more and more products available online, very easy to buy them. There is almost, it's impossible, very difficult to catch people involved into this. And we, as a company, we are working even with social media companies to tackle this issue and continuously provide them with intelligence to help them to restrict these illegal online sellers. But it's, again, a lot more to be done in this area too.
Excellent, thank you. Javier, just to follow up on what we've heard there, is it time that online sellers were licensed in the same way that shopkeepers trading on the street have to have a trading license, and you can verify where they are, you can verify where the products have come from, they have certain obligations to meet in terms of standards and customer care as well. You know, if we were going to focus on the big platforms, for example, Amazon, just as one example. Should they be required to verify and enforce on the platform level? Is this because how can the consumer tell otherwise? Should that licensing take place in a certain locality within the European Union, or through an agency which is able to do that, so that bad actors cannot be excluded completely, but at least can be identified and pushed to the side? Javier?
I think with the platform, with the e-commerce, we have means the opportunity to have more illicit trade, but same time the opportunity to establish real traceability of the operation, the illicit trade of goods in the traditional ways is perhaps more difficult to persecute than if we have a common instrument accepted by all the governments to establish the traceability of all the operation of the e-commerce. And by that, this is very important, the collaboration of platform or the grid company and all the companies. I think it would be necessary to reinforce to have stronger the legislation, the European legislation and the worldwide legislation to establish a common rule to know in every moment what kind of transaction, what kind of commerce it produces, and how to legalize this kind of operation. Another thing is the deep web. This is another camp to combat. But the problem is that these great companies, what is the attitude in relation with that, with the tax, the problem of the tax. This is not the collaboration. At the same time, the cooperation in the governments is absolutely necessary by that. And not always this cooperation exists.
Thank you, Morgan. Just from an economics perspective, politicians love to lock people up and sign tough on crime, but it's expensive and it's not very efficient in terms of the economy. Should policymakers be focusing more on like e-identity, registration, verification of suppliers to exclude illicit traders from the market, rather than overemphasizing the need to prosecute and to identify wrongdoers from the outset as well? How do you see in terms of an economic benefit, which makes more sense?
I mean, it's complicated, but just to recall that in terms of economic impact, it's really, really huge. For example, here at the OECD, we have estimated that because we made a study for the UK, for example, but for UK companies, the foregone sales due to infringement of their IP rights in global trade amounted to like 11 billion of pounds in 2016. So yeah, they really need to act, because it's very huge. The damaging impacts for economies are huge. In terms of job losses for the UK, it was like almost 90,000 jobs that were lost. So it's very important for governments. But I think that, for example, there are many initiatives related to e-commerce to tackle illicit trade on e-commerce that can be good for identifying the bad actors. And in the United States, for example, the government, there was, I think, the creation of electronic commerce working group, which brought major online platform together to collaborate and cooperate on ways to combat counterfeiter selling, because we see here at the OECD that the main the most of the seizures of counterfeit goods were purchased online. So I think a good cooperation with platform and all stakeholders may be a good way to tackle illicit trade.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to another couple of comments that we have from Leah Bados. Interesting question. Where do you see your work in relation to the illicit trade of live animals, including pets, wildlife, and animal-derived products such as meat? Cindy, you have any comments on that?
Yeah, it's again a huge issue. Lots of problems with wildlife trafficking, particularly over the online malls. And definitely governments need to crack down on that. Again, if we had like an e-merchant license, as you were talking just a moment ago about, you know, it would be better for us to be able to stop those bad actors from selling animals to begin with, as well as other illicits.
Okay, thank you. Question for Lucine. Jose Maria Espinar says, what do you think of the new and growing problem of illicit tobacco factories?
Yeah, it's not a new problem. It's a problem which exists for a long time, and it's a everlasting, in a sense, problem. But what I can tell you, some probably good news that, for example, in 2021, at least 44 illegal factories producing various counterfeit tobacco products were seized by law enforcement in Europe. And it means if 44 were seized, it means there are more than 44, but I think it's a good result, and it shows that the law enforcement agencies, they do a good job in this respect. And there is a big concentration. By the way, during pandemic, there was a certain shift of where the factories are based, yes, within the European Union territory. And now there is a big concentration of illegal factories in Belgium and in the Netherlands, and products illegally produced there are intended for markets as UK, Ireland, France, where the most expensive cigarettes are sold. Yeah, so
I find that amazing. Just in terms of having lived in Belgium, I'm in Washington now, but lived in Belgium, Brussels for 10 years, having run a business there, paid tax there, and still doing so. It's incredible that the level of administration and control in Belgium still permits an opportunity for factories to operate outside of the system.
Yeah, I think that it's all about that these criminals involved into this business, they're highly adaptable. And if something is not possible here, they will move to another place. They will find new channels, and e-commerce is one of their quickly developing new channels as well. So that's just shows that they adapt to the circumstances. That's what's happening.
Is their weakest link in terms of their business model? What is the weakest link, Lucine?
In terms of, sorry, in terms of
their supply chain, where can it be broken most easily? They must have weaknesses too.
Oh, definitely. But I think that there is no one weak point, and there should be really complex of measures undertaken by all players, all legal players, including governments as well. So it's, again, as we talked, it's about enforcement, having the intelligence and being able having resources to enforce and to make seizures and to take actions. It's about, as I said already, about predictable and reasonable excise policies, because it tackles the cause of the problem, which is very important. And it's about educating, I think, also consumers, just society. More people are aware what is it about, and actually how many bad things are associated with this, I think it also will help to tackle it. And some people can even bring certain intelligence again, which will help to fight with this, the cause of the problem. So it's a complex of measures, in my view.
Okay, thank you. Let's take another couple of quick comments. Please send your comments in. We don't have a lot of time left, so send your comments and your questions. We'll put those to the panel now. And comment from Kent Braun. We already touched on that to law enforcement. Jeff Hardy, thank you for posting the link there, to which Cindy mentioned as well. You can get that online. And if you mentioned France already, and let's see, the impact of plain packaging of tobacco products and the increase of the illegal market. Raul Rodriguez puts this question. Lucina, is there an impact from plain packaging of tobacco products and in terms of the increase of the illegal market?
You know, it's what is interesting that plain packaging, it's first of all, it doesn't solve the main objective. It doesn't achieve the main objective of the government's consumption. Doesn't go down. So that's important to remember. And of course, if it's easier to make counterfeit product which is in unbranded packaging than in branded. So from this perspective, it just makes life of certain criminals involved into illegal manufacturing easier. That's what is the big picture.
Thank you. Cindy, maybe you want to have a go. This question's from Filippo Ferriolo. And Filippo asks, what should be done by the members of an integrated economic area, such as the EU, to tackle transnational illicit trade, which is deeply integrated in illicit routes and supply chains? I know we've touched on some of this already. In terms of the European Economic Area, what more can be done to stop illicit routes and supply chains?
So what we look at is the best solutions are when you have a government working together holistically. So every agency that has some touch on the unregulated products or through the distribution, the manufacture and distribution of them. So having a working group or a task force that consists of representatives from across the government, sharing information, implementing best practices, working with the private sector is the way we think it should go.
Okay, thank you. Javier, a question for you from Matthew, and he says, what do you think of the strongly increasing prices for luxury goods in auction houses? Does this indicate potential money laundering, and what could potentially be done about it? Javier.
I don't understand what do you think about the
Yeah, so an increase, so prices for luxury goods in auction houses Matthew says they're increasing. And what does this indicate about money laundering, and what can be done about that?
Well, I think the luxury goods, the increasing of the prices, the increasing of the taxes are absolutely necessary. This is one of the tools to distribute the wellness in a society, no? And in relation with the money laundering, I think there is not this problem to pay all taxes. This is a political problem. This is it is necessary to have a political will to combat really this kind of crime. Not only money laundering, all the illicit trades and economic crimes. No, it is necessary the cooperation among the nation, the cooperation among the governments. No. Absolutely necessary into the European Union, and with this public concept, we have proposed one European economic and European political and social deal against the economic crimes, the money laundering, and the tax evasion, with all the force.
Okay.
if there
But
is
Javi,
this
isn't
volunteer,
it true, Javi, isn't it true that we can have good laws and good intentions, but we don't invest sufficiently in the law enforcement personnel expertise that's necessary to deliver a result in that policy? Javier?
no, we haven't good laws, good European laws. There are different in one state and other state. We need, by example, in money laundering, we have by the 6 directive. 6 in 20 years, 6. There is no. It is necessary now. The last package is I think is the better package of law package.
Okay.
No, but we need law. We know, but also we need expertise. We need Europol into this kind of crime. We need the role of the European prosecutor, public prosecutor.
Yeah.
We need all. But the first question is a real political will.
All right. Let me put to Morgan also. Morgan, in terms of how the OECD sees money laundering and illicit trade, you have any research in this which indicates perhaps which sectors are more vulnerable, which countries are more vulnerable when it comes to laundering the proceeds from crime?
What we see here at the OECD, we have a global overview of the trade routes of illicit trade, and what we see that a specific attention should be paid for the economies like China, Hong Kong, or Turkey, of course.
Okay, thank you. Cindy, anything else to add to that in terms of money laundering and illicit trade? Is enough been done? Do we have the tools to combat it?
I think the OECD has put out some wonderful guidelines, but it's a matter of, as Javier mentioned, you have to have the political will to implement a lot of these things. And it's not just something that should be of concern to the finance ministers or the treasuries. It really cuts across a lot of governments.
Okay, and why is this argument not brought to wider government effectively as well? And the finance minister surely is concerned about it, but the health minister is not getting his or her budget increased because of this loss of revenue as well. The environment minister should surely be concerned that the manufacturing of products in substandard conditions without the proper environmental controls are affecting our carbon emissions. The justice minister should be concerned about human trafficking within this context as well. Are we just not doing this properly? Is there not joined up government in this? Cindy?
Absolutely, that's what we have to do, and programs like this, should be very helpful. We need to do more of this.
Okay, thank you. Question on tobacco from Raul Rodriguez. Listen, how is the traceability of tobacco products helping to control the illegal market? Is there a broader application in terms of what the tobacco industry is doing, which helps reduce the impact on the wider illegal market?
They work, but let's be honest, they work and they are applied for legal tobacco companies, legal business. So what is behind still the sin, it stays in many cases behind the sin, and that's still remains the problem. We should also bear it in mind that yes, criminals, they find the ways to avoid official channels, and they are not at the end, nothing is tracked there. That's so this remains the problem.
Okay, Kirsten Kopp touches on this as well. Maybe Kirsten want to add a little detail to this. Yeah, she says, what about track and trace as an instrument to combat illicit trade? Cindy, we talked about e-identity, e-commerce and that, but in terms of other markets and other systems and track and trace, what lessons can we learn globally that can be applied to illicit trade in Europe? What works?
Getting all the parties talking to each other, sharing information is critical. Having databases and abilities to communicate in a common language, tracing a product that goes from being ordered through the distribution process, and communicating with the ports and the carriers, that this product is coming, and it's a fishy kind of product that has bad labeling, or bad invoicing. All those kinds of triggers need to be traced, and again, it comes from a collective effort with the private sector and governments working together.
Okay, Cindy, just on the U.S. Trade Representative's Notorious Markets report as well, I think 42 markets were identified for online risk as well. If we can identify that there is a significant level of illicit activity taking place there, this is money being lost to the finance ministries globally as well. What is being done? What is the Trade Representative recommending that could be done to tackle these 42 markets?
Yeah, so it's really putting the spotlight on the dangers perpetrated by these online markets and social media platforms, and it's helping to by putting the spotlight on it, create more consumer awareness, but also government awareness that they need to work together to prevent the continued growth of the counterfeit products that are dangerous. People need to understand that the products that they are buying online can, catch on fire because they're unregulated and produced in an environment that is where you have products that you're ingesting or putting on your face that have, pesticides in them. So it's a huge communication problem.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Ewan Grant. How well are the results of major investigations shared when the controlling minds are arrested or convicted or detected and deterred? These are very different things, and many major operations only snatch lower end operatives. Javier, you mentioned Europol earlier. Are you aware of how major investigations share the information in Europe and outside of Europe to try and take down these larger operators, when Ewan saying basically it's only the small guys get caught?
There isn't easy because of there are several governments that don't want to give to Europol capacity to investigate directly. I think one consequence of the creation of the authority anti-money laundering, this is a start proposal of the last European Commission package, is to have a European instrument to investigate directly the biggest cases to money laundering. I think in collaboration with the European Prosecutor Office and also with the capacity to investigate of Europol. But this is there is a very huge debate about this kind of proposal means to have a federal policy in Europe. And as you know, there is the combat between into the Europe in the political debate about the future of Europe. The side of the partners of federal Europe, we will propose that kind of policial activity in this okay. Because we have transnational crimes. This is important, and transnational crimes need transnational laws and transnational policies.
Okay, but listen, in your experience in terms of working with law enforcement, your company and organizations, how do you see the interoperability of data sharing and the focus in different countries as well do law enforcement agencies really focus on the big players, or do they just take out small players because they're easier? And what's the data sharing like that you have seen in terms of operational management, if any?
No, first of all, I want to say that just against some statistics, in 2021, the information we as a company provided to law enforcement agencies led to the seizure of nearly 3.3 billion illicit cigarettes and the closure of 20 illegal factories and 33 storage warehouses, which shows that cooperation between the industry and the government, the law enforcement agencies, it's working, and it really brings tangible, clear results, good results. At the same time, your question is whether it's more to tackle big or small players. I think that it's not about the size. If there is enough intelligence, if there is enough information, that the action is taken, irrespectively of the size, of the, for example, if we speak about illegal factory. What is very important that it's again, we're talking about the same actually measures. Important that governments should explore measures that allow consumer confidence to grow and to avoid this temptation, to spend on illicit products. It should be again complex of measures from all angles, in a sense.
Excellent, thank you. Cindy, can I ask you on the same element there? What do you observe in terms of law enforcement cooperation and the role of industry as well? Now, it would seem to me that if there's a lot of money to be had for national administrations and European administrations from reducing illicit trade, then you'd want to be investing more in the law enforcement side to claim back that revenue by pushing out illicit trade. Are we seeing investment in law enforcement in this side that you're aware of?
So I can't speak particularly to Europe on that. I can point in the U.S. we have a number of actions going on where the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol have created an initiative, the 21st Century Customs Modernization Act initiative, and they have a focus on law enforcement and platforms and money processors and payment processors and distribution mechanisms, all working together to share information to prove the concept that if we're working together, that they can clamp down and prevent bad products coming into the country. So these kinds of examples of working together should help across the globe, but it takes the political will and the government regulatory structures to make that happen.
Just in terms of, you have to give his perspective on why that political will isn't there. Why do you see the political will absent, or at least not sufficient, to solve this problem, Cindy?
There's an issue with corruption, that's one thing, and then there's an issue of there's a lot going on in the world, and so there's competing challenges that governments are facing. So
Morgan,
we think consumer awareness and business owners really helping to bring the spotlight on the need to clamp down for the government's own best interests.
Thank you. Morgan, anything to add on that?
Excuse me?
Anything to add? And as a follow-up to what Cindy has said in terms of the lack of political will, the role of corruption, why, if we have clear policies like we've just heard about the 21st Century Customs Modernization approach and initiative, why are we not seeing the results of this? What needs to be changed in terms of political mindset to make this happen?
Yeah, I think of course all governments should be pay attention of this big issue, and as mentioned earlier, as well as e-commerce platforms and industry, and of course the role of consumers is also very, very important.
Thank you. And we're just going to wrap up in a moment, so you'll have your closing remarks in just a second. But listen, the sensibility here that we have from this discussion is that the tools are there, the political will isn't. There's a huge opportunity to reclaim money into the financial exchequers across Europe, and that money can be deployed for health, for education, for infrastructure, for carbon reduction, all those things as well. So let me just ask you, are you optimistic that we're going to see a step change in how Europe deals with illicit trade, and that our public services will improve as a consequence?
Mm-hmm. No, I'm overall a very optimistic person, so I want to be optimistic here as well. But again, it's really important that all together, society, government, industry, play together, because we all are paying the price for this illicit trade. And unless we curb the illicit trade, we will continue to pay this price. And organized crime groups will continue to fund even terrorism. There was information by a European Commission some years ago that some resources are going in this direction. They will continue to fund bonded labor and other criminality at the expense of us, of the society, of honest people and legitimate businesses. And important, again, I want just to emphasize that law enforcement is effective only in complex, together with reasonable and balanced policies in place. Talking again about taxation and raising the prices at the end of legal products. So
Sure.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, just wanted to say that I think that really government should first look at how to get money back from criminals rather than penalizing, consumers and legal businesses by just putting in place policies which are not reasonable. That's
okay. Thank you. Let me ask each of you 30-second soundbite just to wrap up. Javier, let's start with you. 30 seconds. Your takeaway from today.
I'm moderately optimistic about the possibility to have a strong political will in the institution by the political party. But it is a task of the civil society, of the trade unions, I am trade unionist, of the organization of civil society to push the government and to create this stronger will to combat effectively this kind of crimes.
Thank
you. Morgan, 30 seconds, your takeaway from today.
Yeah. The illicit trade is a very huge threat, and it's a threat that evolves very quickly, with criminals adapting quickly their strategies. So we think at the OECD that it's very important to have follow-up of this trade. And as it has been already mentioned earlier, counterfeits, as they can be produced outside safety and security norm and standards, they can be dangerous for consumers, and they may directly threaten health and security of consumers. And we are now working at the OECD on dangerous fakes, and I hope this study will help to raise awareness of consumers.
Morgan, thank you. Cindy, over to you. 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think the increased awareness is going to lead to action, and it takes all of us working together to continue to keep the pressure on, because it makes sense for governments, it makes sense for their consumers and their economies.
Thank you. Lucine, last word, 30 seconds.
Last word, strong enforcement with reasonable and balanced taxation policies, in my view, it's the key in tackling illicit trade.
Thank you. Thanks to our panel today. Excellent discussion from Javier, Morgan, Cindy, and Lucine. Also, thanks to our Euractiv team, our social media team. We'll be still working on this after we finish in just a moment. And to the team in the studio, to Bonya, Zoran, Malta, Tamara, and Elisa, thank you for all your production efforts today. As always, we appreciate it. And to JTI for support for the program today. We couldn't have done it without you. So thanks so much to you, our audience. Very engaged today, lots of questions, and we appreciate that, and for your time today as well. So I wish you a good afternoon.